So great to see you today. My name is Kevin Thompson. I'm the Married Life pastor around here, one of the teaching pastors. Great to see you here today. In just a moment, we're going to look at Luke chapter 13. So if you have your Bibles, and I hope that you do, you can turn with me there. But before we do, Pastor Ray has asked me to give you an update about what's happening at one of our locations and then the opportunity to help meet a need. And that is our Auburn location, which is very near and dear to my heart. Right? And so they've been meeting up there just for a month or two up in one of the schools. Been a great blessing. 600 people now are taking care, are being part of that location. And yet, because of a circumstance out of our control and actually outside the control really of the school district as well, they came to us a week ago and said, look, we're sorry that you actually can't meet here any longer. And so what was our plan for the next year or two was suddenly taken away. We didn't know what we were going to do. All right, God, what are you doing? We feel like there's a need that's here. We don't know where we're going to go. I didn't want them all at my house. And so, but isn't it just like God, as one door is closing over here and in faith we're saying what's next, he opened up another door. And literally a building, a space became available. And not only is that space available on Sundays, it's actually something that we can take possession of the entire week, which means now student ministry can be on campus. We can do Wednesday night children's programs. We can do Big Wednesday. We can do Married Life. We can do all these things. And it's a tremendous blessing and a reminder to us of the importance of faith. But this is where the opportunity comes in. They literally just ended their first service and they're about to have their second service, but they don't have anything. There's nothing in that space because we've been renting all this equipment. And so we have the opportunity to come together as Bayside Global and now assist them. And so here's what we're going to do at this moment. We're actually going to call the ushers back up front, and we're going to take up a second offering. And if you're a guest with us today, you can go, wait, what? I didn't like the first offering. Why are you taking up a second offering? Look, hey, this is not, you don't have to worry about this one bit. This is not for you. But if you are a follower of Jesus, this is an opportunity to take care of a need. And I recognize you've already given and all those things. But imagine what would happen if every family that attended Bayside globally this week just gave $20. So what I would spend at McDonald's for lunch and what I probably will spend at McDonald's for lunch, just to take that, give that, and if we collectively brought that together, that would just immediately push that ministry forward. And our prayer is not just that they have 2 services, but they very quickly run out of space, have to go 3, 4, 5. I assure you, I know this for a fact, that region needs another good, healthy church, and we can provide that. That's the opportunity we have. And so if you are a member of Bayside, a regular attender at Bayside, if you're a believer, if you're a guest, but you're a believer, we don't hesitate to invite you into involving yourself in church planting. But if you're a non-believer, just looking at what's going on, you just let the bucket pass, no problem. So let me lead us in prayer. If you want to, you can text LAUNCH to 56316. That's a way to give online. Let me lead us in prayer, and we'll continue to worship. Most gracious Heavenly Father, thank you for this day and this opportunity. Take each of our gifts, combine them together, multiply them, and use them in a way that we could never do on our own. It's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen. Thank you so much. So those buckets are going to pass. And as they're passing, I just want to remind you, Big Wednesday started off this past week. We had a great time all over this campus, tons of classes. It's not too late to join. You can text Big Wednesday to 56316. The women's study actually does start this week. You haven't even missed a week. It's the ruthless elimination of hurry. And so if you are a woman and your life is stress-free, you lived a relaxed, non-hurried life, you don't have to show up. You just stay home Wednesday night being peaceful with yourself. And yet, if you are experiencing some hurry, this is a great class that you can be a part of. Parenting. Lisa Thompson, I think, is teaching this week in the 5 chapters. And then I'm going to be talking about, in relationships, I'm going to be talking about rupture and repair. So imagine this. If you have a fight with your significant other, how long does it take to repair that? Let's say it takes a week. What would it be like if you could do that in one day? Notice I didn't say this week I'm going to lessen how much you fight with your spouse. That's going to happen. The fights are guaranteed. It's the repair that's where the magic takes place. And literally, I can give you 4 extra days of good relationship instead of going a week. And that's going to take place this Wednesday night, Big Wednesdays, 56316. Great to be with you today. Luke chapter 13 is where we're going to be. I still remember the saddest funeral I've ever officiated. And that's saying a lot, because I've officiated a lot of sad funerals. I've done funerals of all types. The matriarch who touched so many lives, we were so broken that she was gone. The baby I held in my own arms, the child of the disease that they did not in any way deserve, the teenager who just left for the game, just go into the game and never returned, the young college student full of so much promise, so successful, who just for a moment lost a glimpse of what the future could actually hold. The mom who left behind two teenage girls, and the widowed father, the good, strong father who had such an influence and an impact, who we thought he would defeat that disease, the murder victim, and all the questions and the chaos that went alongside that. And yet I have to be truthful that I've done so many funerals that literally they all kind of blur together, that if the right memory sparks, I can remember, but they all kind of blur together. But this one, I remember. I shouldn't have even done it. I pastored a large church. I did so many funerals that they never really called me to do another outside funeral of somebody I didn't know, unless the person was of great significance. And so if they didn't have a religious connection, and it was a state senator or a law enforcement death in the line of duty, an active military overseas, if there was somebody of significance and the funeral was going to be large, I tended to get called in. But this person had very little significance in the eyes of the world. The funeral home director called me and said, "Kevin, I just met with this young couple. They've only been married 18 months, and their lives just fell apart. They were pregnant, good delivery, all those things, and yet it was stillbirth. And the families, I don't know what's going on. They're fighting in some ways, and there's just all this dissension there. And I just can't stand the idea of this service not going in a meaningful way for this young couple. They have nobody. Kevin, will you do it?" And I said, "Yeah, I will. I'll be happy to assist them." Now, normally whenever I do a funeral of somebody I don't know, I always want to meet with the family. And I always tell them, hey, two things. One part of this, I'm going to speak to you. I've got that. One part of this, I'm going to speak for you. I want to talk about the person we're memorializing in this moment. So I meet and I try to gather information, but there's no need to do that. This child didn't live a day. So the day of the funeral, I showed up, 10 o'clock funeral. I roll in at 9:45. I go and I meet the couple. I then kind of stand back, go back, talk to the funeral home guys, waiting for the crowd to show up so we can start the service at 10 o'clock. But nobody showed up. Nobody. 9:58, nobody. 10:02, nobody. 10:05, the funeral home director looks at me and he goes, "We got to start." And I said, we can't start. There's nobody here. Why didn't you tell me? I could have filled this chapel with 100 people. I could have got 100 friends to show up, to show this couple that their loss matters, to value the life of this child in this moment. How can we do this funeral in this moment? He said, we have to start. And so I went to the front row, and I got 3 chairs, and I went up next to the casket, and I put the 3 chairs down, and I sat down. I invited them to sit with me. Caskets should not come in size small. And so for 20 or 25 minutes, we just talked. I talked about suffering and heartache and questions and doubt and uncertainty and faith and hope and heaven and Jesus and eternity. And then I prayed. And I sat there until I felt like they had all of me that they could take. And then I got in my car. By nature, I'm not a guy who really questions the existence of God very much. But the loss of an infant, the suffering of 2 kids who are trying to do it right, who come from tough backgrounds and are suffering in this moment, and their parents don't even have the humility to set aside their own grievances and to show up and to love their kids and to put themselves second in comparison to somebody else first in the midst of this heartache. That kind of begins to make me question, God, where are you? You walk down the hallway of the cancer ward of the children's hospital. God, where are you? You read the headlines of the tragedies taking place all around the world. You say, God, how is it that you can be good and loving and powerful and sovereign, and at the exact same time this sorrow and heartbreak can be a part of our lives and a part of the lives of others? If there is a loving, compassionate, powerful God, how can evil and suffering be present within the world? That's what we're going to look at today. And in Luke chapter 13, there's an interesting mingling of evil and suffering that I think will help frame our talk. We're going to read Luke chapter 13, verses 1 through 5. Now there were some present at the time who told Jesus about the Galileans whose blood Pilate had mixed with their sacrifices. And Jesus answered, "Do you think that these Galileans were worse sinners than all the other Galileans because they suffered in this way? I tell you, no. But unless you repent, you too will all perish. Or those 18 who died when the tower in Siloam fell on them, do you think they were more guilty than all the others living in Jerusalem? I tell you, no. But unless you repent, you too will all perish." So for the last couple of weeks, we've been in the series on skeptical, of answering the great challenges to Christianity, and we've looked at doubt, and next week, Pastor Mark will be here looking at the exclusivity of Jesus. Last week, Pastor Ray looked at what I think is probably the most pressing question from the gospel. Actually, it's talked about later in Luke chapter 13, and that's the presence of hypocrisy among people of faith. But today we want to look at what is probably the most pressing question from those outside of the faith, and specifically those who would label themselves as atheists, maybe even agnostic. And that is, how can there be the coexistence of evil and suffering and a good, powerful, sovereign God? Now I recognize on this issue of evil and suffering, I have suffered. You don't live for 46 years without experiencing suffering. Every single person in this room has suffered to some extent, some in unimaginable ways, others in just the newness of what life is. But we all are fallen people that live in a fallen world, and all of us have firsthand experience with suffering. But for me, when it comes to evil, I'm not aware of any firsthand, up-close experience with true evil. And yet I understand that it happens, it takes place. But for me, evil is something that I read about online or watch on the news. And so for me, evil is something that so often I see on my television. But I recognize for many people in the room, what I see on my television, you see on the back of your eyelids whenever you try to go to sleep at night. That you have met evil in this world. People with ill intention that cause tremendous harm with no seemingly explanation of why that had to take place within your life. It's the experience of many in this room just because of life's circumstances. It's the experience of many in this room because of life's chosen professions. So you have an up-hand, close look at evil if you are a law enforcement officer. If you are a first responder, a firefighter, the first on the scene who's willing to risk your life, uncertain about the danger that is taking place. This is your experience if you are active currently in military, or sometime in the past you have been involved in military. It's a true experience of the ER nurse who sits with the person before the test is done to see if sexual assault has taken place. It's the experience of the private investigators and the detectives who have to figure out if child abuse is going on. There are many in this room that what I see on the back of my television, you see on the back of your eyelids, and this is very personal for you, and I get that. And I by no means want to come across as though I know what your experience is like. We have all suffered. Some of us have experienced evil, and yet it raises the question for all of us, how can that be, knowing what we know about God? In Luke chapter 13, Jesus now is on his way to Jerusalem. And so remember, Luke is giving an orderly account of the life of Jesus. So for the first 9 verses, he kind of sets the first 9 chapters, he sets the context. First couple of chapters of Luke show the birth story of what is taking place in the beginning of the earthly ministry. And then in Luke chapter 9, the text says that Jesus set his face toward Jerusalem. It is showing now that Jesus knows what is coming, and while all the ministry is taking place, he is fixated on what his destiny is going to be and where he's going in that direction. So by the time we get to Luke chapter 13, Jesus is well aware of his own coming suffering, the evil that he is going to be a victim of in that moment, when a group of people come up to him and they recall a historical event that we don't know about. We don't know what the event is. We kind of know what's happened. And that is, there were some good Galilean Jews who were worshiping God in accordance to the Old Testament, offering sacrifices, now trying to be as obedient as they could possibly be. when Pilate came in and martyred some of them and took their blood and mingled it with the blood of the sacrifice in a way to mock them. Now, we don't know this specific event, but there is a historical account of another event where Pilate had his soldiers dress up as though they were Jewish worshipers and to come into a worship service. And in the midst of that worship service, upon the given signals, the guards and the soldiers then revealed their swords and actually murdered those who were worshiping. We do know that's kind of the history of what Pilate is about. Pilate now, in many ways, is a caricature of all the evil dictators who have ever lived. Those who reign today in North Korea and in Russia, in aspects of Africa, those who have reigned throughout time and history, these evil dictators who are willing to do whatever they want, the whims of whatever they want, with no compassion upon those that they are leading, but to use those they are leading for their own pleasure. That's who Pilate is. He's the epitome of evil. And now these worshipers of God are trying to figure out, if this happens, why? And more specifically, why, like my brother and sister, why did they suffer in this way and I didn't? How can we reconcile this idea of these unjust killings? And so they drew a conclusion. And it's a logical human conclusion in which they said, okay, here must be how it works. Bad things must happen to bad people. And so while I don't know why these people would be worse off than we are, clearly they have done something to deserve to be victims in the way that they were. And they brought that idea to Jesus and said, hey, is this the case? And Jesus now, in love and compassion, corrects them and shows them, no. You've drawn the wrong conclusion. In the confusion of this world and you trying to deal with these big issues, you've now drawn the wrong conclusion. And Jesus, in answering this question about evil dictators, then answers a secondary question that the people don't ask, but he sees as wedded to it. Then that isn't just what happens when you're the victim of the whims of an evil dictator. It's that what happens whenever you just suffer in this world just kind of in a common way. Have you done something wrong? And so they bring these questions to Jesus, and you can see what the text says. Do you think that these Galileans were worse sinners than all the other Galileans because they suffered this way? And he very strongly says no. And then he mentions this other situation where this tower in Siloam fell over and killed some people. And we don't know what caused the tower to fall. Maybe it was an earthquake. Maybe it was a wind. Maybe it was a great tornado. Maybe it was an act of domestic terrorism. We don't know what caused the tower to fall. But as the tower fell, some seemingly innocent people were victims of that tragedy. And now what Jesus is saying is, hey, look, don't judge them in assuming that because they suffered this fate, that they were more wrong than you are. And what I like about this story and framing the questions that we're looking at today is kind of two things. One, I love how this story shows the human tendency that when dealing with big, deep issues, humanity tends to draw the wrong conclusions. No ill intent. It's just our brains are not big enough. God's ways are bigger than our ways. Our brains are not big enough to comprehend everything that God is doing and how this world has come to be. And so as we try to make sense of it on our own, we will come to the wrong conclusions, just as these people who approached Jesus did. So that then should cause us tremendous pause if whenever we are drawing these conclusions about the world, about our life, because think about this. These wrong conclusions that led to a wrong understanding of God, themselves, and others. That's costly. And so we have to approach these issues with great humility because we are prone to be led astray without even knowing. Good intentions, but we come to the wrong conclusions. And then the second thing I like about this story is it reveals to us that this issue of evil and suffering, it's a question that we all have to answer. Not everybody believes that God exists, but whatever you believe about that doesn't matter. We all believe that evil and suffering exist, and we have to explain the reality that we experience. We have to explain why we live in a world in which that is present, in which there can be good, in which there can be bad. How does all that come to be? And every great religion, every great philosophy, every great worldview is simply an attempt to explain life as we are experiencing it. And yet, so often whenever it comes to this topic, we see this as a question an atheist asks a Christian, and it simply puts the Christian on trial, and rightly so. We proclaim a powerful, just, merciful God. We experience sorrow and brokenness and evil in this world. How do those two things come together? It is the rightful question of an atheist to look at us and say, explain yourselves and reconcile what's going on here. But notice this. It's not just our question. It's everybody's question. So it's not a concept of, okay, you're on trial, now explain this to me, Kevin. Explain in totality God and evil and suffering, how they intermingle. And whenever I can't fully explain it, which I can't fully explain it, they then go, okay, Christianity is wrong, let me go on about my world. But then I say, hold on, question from the rear, I got a question from you. How do you explain evil and suffering? And then now they have to be put on trial in the same way I should be put on trial. But the reality is every worldview, religion, and philosophy needs to be put on trial. And the question then becomes I'm not a Christian because Christianity gives a perfect, definitive answer that answers every question for me. I am a Christian because when putting every philosophy on trial, Christianity makes the most sense to me of this question. So let's just spend a moment. We're going to look at the Christian answer, but let's spend a moment to look at what are the other possible answers. But what are the ways that we can answer this question of why evil and suffering? So what are the major religions, major philosophies, and major worldviews? How do they see it? Well, we see the first viewpoint here, that these followers of God actually came to a wrong conclusion, and their conclusion was simply this: bad things happen to bad people. So why do evil and suffering exist? Well, because you earned it. You've done something. It's the idea of karma. So Hinduism would kind of lead to this perspective. And from Hinduism, it could be that it's not even something you've done in this life. Maybe you've done something in a past life. So even if you are pretty good, and even if I can't see any differences between me and you now, if you suffered a negative fate, well, apparently you did something in the previous life, and now you're paying off for that. Okay? That's one viewpoint, one possibility. Others would look at the world and go, no, it's not that. Evil and suffering are just a natural part of life. It's always been, and it always will be. And it's just part of who we are, and we can't make any rhyme or reason of it. And so many atheists would fall in this category. Philosophical naturalists would fall in this category. So it's this idea, look, if there is no God, if we came from no one and we're going nowhere, this is just how life turned out. This is just where chance has led it. There are good things, there are bad things, no rhyme or reason. We just got to go through life kind of that way. Others would say, no, actually evil and suffering are an illusion. They're a human creation. That we have created these categories of good and bad to help us navigate this world, that actually there is no definition of good or bad. There is no absolute truth. There is no morality. There are no ethics. Everything is just a byproduct of whatever went bang, and here we are. And so, hey, what's evil for you might be good for me, and what's good for me might be evil for you. So all of this is just an illusion. The existentialists would say this in this way. Nietzsche and Sartre and some of the New Age philosophies, that it's just an illusion of what is taking place. Others now would take that idea and from a religious standpoint, kind of tie them together and say, no. Evil and suffering are actually an opportunity. You see, what they're actually a source of is us having wrong attachments. That true enlightenment comes from within when we are disconnected from everything else. And sorrow comes and grief comes whenever we wrongly value things outside of ourselves, like family, like other people, like life as we created it. And so evil and suffering, as we have things ripped away from us, it hurts, but that is now an opportunity to experience true enlightenment as we are only attached to our inner well-being and source. And then others would say, so that's the idea of Buddhism and some New Age philosophy, Stoicism to an extent. Thinking about Jocko Willink would say, whatever happens to you in life, you should just say good. Try that the next time you have a fight with your spouse. Just write good and hand them a card. And then others would finally say that no, evil and suffering are actually a test. It's a test from God. So the Creator is up there. He's created us. He now wants to see who among humanity is the best and who can achieve the greatest. And those are the only ones that deserve a relationship with him. And so I'm now going to give you kind of this evil and suffering SAT. And whoever has the highest scores, you're going to pass the test. And the rest of you can suffer and experience punishment. And those who really pass the tests now, those who are willing to sacrifice. So the hijackers on 9/11 now, they're going to pass the test because they're willing to suffer in this moment with a sense of nobility. And for the most part, those are kind of the 5 ideas. Now, look, I recognize that worldviews, philosophies, every other major religion of the world is far more complex than one line on the screen. And in no way do I want to downplay the complexity of these worldviews and these ideas. And let's face it, some people legitimately look at the world and they make sense of one of these and they say, that's what I'm going to build my life on. But for me, they're all lacking. They just don't match my experience. Just walk through them, just quickly walk through them. Okay, let's start at the end. A test. Okay, if evil and suffering is a test, and maybe it is, but if evil and suffering is a test, here's the bad news for me, I'm not gonna pass. Now, I'm not going to continually live with nobility, with openness, with open hands to God, to go wherever he wants to do whatever he wants to do. I'm going to turn my fist to him on occasion and say, God, what are you doing? And yet, if you believe the God of the test, that is a God who doesn't appreciate your questions. That is a God who would say, how dare you? Who are you to question me? And in that moment, we'd be done with us. We would actually be failing the test if we questioned the reasonability of the test. And the truth of the matter is this, you're just as screwed up as I am. If this is a test, you're going to fail. Well, okay, the concept of opportunity and illusion are kind of the similar things. There's one's religious and one's non-religious. But they're both kind of revolving around this idea that our emotions aren't real. That the emotions are actually the problem. And so if it's an opportunity, now you have the opportunity to get rid of those negative emotions. And you shouldn't have actually been so attached to them. Okay, I get the idea that I'm attached to some things I shouldn't be attached to. But my wife? No. I'm supposed to be attached to her. I'm supposed to care about my children. I'm supposed to care about my friends and my community. And to now tell me that if you were lost and I was now grieving you, to say that is a wrong attachment on my part, that now just doesn't match up with my experience. And then on top of that, for others to say it's an illusion. It's an illusion. There's a reason in this moment that existentialists aren't asked to do funerals. Imagine me standing up at the loss of your child and say, hey, what do you have experiencing going on? It doesn't exist. It's just your mind playing games with you. Just move past that. It's pain and suffering are not an illusion. And so others would say, well, it's just natural. Well, let me ask you this. If it's natural, why does it feel so wrong? Is there any other example of something in nature that feels so foreign? It's so outside of what it feels like my experience should be. One of my favorite theologians, Cornelius Plantinga Jr., if for no other reason, what a name. How about that? Cornelius Plantinga Jr. Take that, Mark Clark. That sounds like a smart guy. He has a book that's entitled Not the Way It's Supposed to Be. And he says, if you look at some experience in your life or in this world and you think, it shouldn't be this way, that's a Christian thought. Because what you're saying is there's a way it should be. That there is a truth. And so if you believe in naturalism, if you believe now that we come from no one and we're going nowhere, then who am I to say what's right and what's wrong? If a pack of coyotes attack one of their own and kill one of their own, well, that's just nature. But if humanity injures a child, that's wrong. We know it. We can feel it. And yet if we came from no one and we're going nowhere, who are you and I to inject our ethics and our morality on somebody else? If somebody else wants to treat their family that way, isn't that their right? Because isn't it just the nature of humanity to do evil and suffering? Well, that doesn't match up my experience. It feels so foreign in so many ways. And so the one that I actually would lean toward the most, if I had to choose apart from Christianity, is karma. Bad things happen to bad people. So if something bad happens to you, I don't know what you did. You did something. And of all these ways, it makes the most sense to me. Until something bad happens to me. And then I look at you and I think, I'm not saying I'm better than you. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying some of you. Why did I get this and not them? Why am I the victim and not them? Well, it's something you did in some past life. Well, what does that do for me? And I look at all of these, and whenever we put them on trial, I begin to say there's not enough evidence in that for me to say, yes, this is it. So what does Christianity say? Well, unfortunately, Christianity, there's not a chapter that you can turn to in which Jesus gives a discourse on here's the sources and the origin of evil, and here's why I exist in the world, here's what I'm doing with it. That doesn't exist. Instead, we do have the basic narrative of the Bible that's telling us some aspects, some reality of what's going on, of why this is such a part of the human experience. And so let's look at a couple of these. The first one is this, that the Bible teaches that evil and suffering are real. They're not an illusion. Your feelings are not an illusion. The grief that you feel is real. It's why you can't stuff it. It's why you can't deny it. It's why stoicism is not a proper approach. You have to feel this. You have to deal with truth and reality, and things happen in our world in a way that it shouldn't be taking place in this moment. And this is real in so many ways. There's a substance behind the pain. The divorce matters. That grief is real. The love you have at the birth of a baby, that's real. There's substance in that moment. Think about this. If you believe we came from no one and we're going nowhere, whenever you look at your spouse and you say, I love you, it is just the chemicals in your brain trying to perpetrate humanity into lasting nature. And so that actually has no substance to you. But when Jenny looks at me and says, I love you, there's value to it. It's real. And the Bible validates that. There's a reason Jesus comes upon the death of his friends and sees the grief and the sorrow of his friends, and he weeps, even knowing he's going to raise Lazarus from the dead. There's a reason he looks out on the city of Jerusalem and weeps. That grief is real, and the Bible shows us that. And you know what? That matches my experience. It matches and validates how I see the world. Yes, these things are real. The Bible teaches that evil and suffering haven't always existed. That in the garden, it wasn't there, not in the human experience. Now, we can get into the idea of the serpent and Satan and angels and all that. That's fine. But from a human experience, Adam and Eve didn't experience evil and suffering until they rebelled. And then it became part of the human experience. But a day is going to come. Not only did it not exist at the beginning, a day is going to come in which it's not going to exist again. And God is going to make all things right. And evil and suffering will be no more. And is it possible that that's the reason that evil and suffering feels so foreign to me, is because it's not natural to us? We weren't created for this. And there's a reason there's a loss. There's a reason when death and grief come your way that it feels like you lose yourself for a moment. It feels like you can't have your bearings any longer. It's because you're experiencing something that you and I were not created for. It's unnatural. Now, which do you believe about evil and suffering? Is it just always has been and always will be, so it's a natural part of life? Or does it feel foreign to you? If it feels foreign to you, that's a Christian belief. That's a Christian concept. The Bible teaches that despite the horrors of evil and suffering, God can use it because of his power to transform us. That even the greatest forms of evil, God can take that and use it for our good and for his glory. Your hardest sufferings and hardships, how do we pray it in the serenity prayer? Believing that hardship is the pathway toward peace. That's not because of the power of evil and suffering. That's because of the power of God. That he can take even what was meant for evil and then use it for good. And somehow that God uses that. And it's a legitimate question. I understand why a person would say, hey, how can evil and suffering exist and there be a powerful sovereign God? But Timothy Keller says this, look, if your God is big enough that to exist there shouldn't be an evil and suffering, at the same time, you have to be able to say that God has reasons for evil and suffering that you and I cannot fully understand. And he does. And so we can lean into evil and suffering and go, all right, God, what's your plan? And then the Bible tells us that God actually restrains evil and calls on us to help. That as bad as this world is, listen to me, it's not as bad as it could be. That there is a force somehow, not restraining as much as we want, but somehow restraining evil. There are some things that it looks like evil is never going to be stopped. It's forever going to win. And then something happens and a dictator that feels like he's going to be around forever suddenly dies and it's stopped. What is that? Well, God is actually holding it back. And not only is he holding it back, he's then calling on you and I, who have our eyes opened by God's grace, to then engage with him. God holds it back. That's part of one of the functions of government, by the way. Government can't stop evil, but it is called to restrain evil to some extent. And then you and I are called to join forces with God in response to what he has given to us, to go about this world trying to restrain evil and to unleash compassion upon those who are suffering, to try to lighten their load in some way. It's a reason that it's a rightful vocation in response to who God is, to enter into law enforcement, to try to restrain evil. There's a reason that some of our kids should go into the military to now restrain evil. It's why we should be pushing our kids into being first responders and to validating these professions of nurses, of teachers, of counselors, of those who are going to come along and sit beside those who are suffering, because that is a natural byproduct of what the church tends to do. It's no accident that all these other religions and philosophies run from suffering, and yet it's the church that creates hospitals. It's the church that creates ministries to assist people. It's the church that comes in and helps solve addiction. It's the church that now can run to suffering. And that's our call. And then notice this finally, what the Bible teaches. It doesn't give every answer, but it does show this. That Jesus actually defeats evil through suffering. And that's what he did on the cross. And the battle has already been done. And it's now all over but the shouting. And it feels like it's still taking place, and I get that. But the outcome is already certain. And the way Jesus did that was to actually enter into our suffering. So we have a God who knows and cares. He actually enters into our suffering. That does not answer every question for me. Where did evil come from? Why does God, we know that God is not the author of it, but why does he allow it to exist? Why doesn't he just hurry up and come back already? I don't know. But as I look at all the choices, Christianity makes the most sense to me. It doesn't answer every question, but it makes the most sense to me, and that's why I'm a believer in Jesus. And that's what I build my life on. Now here's my question for you. Which one do you believe? And notice this, you have to choose. Now, if you can come up with some other explanation, you can have one of the major religions of the world. But you have to choose. You can't just go through life going, oh, well, we just can't know. Because if that, then you're a naturalist. We just can't know. Okay, we come from no one. We're going nowhere. There's no right or wrong. I'm just going to live my life. But you have to build your life on something. And for me, it could be that many in the room are looking at what the other ideas are. And you go, you know what? That doesn't fit my experience. My heart has broken. There is sorrow. There is evil in this world. All that is real. And yet it feels so foreign. So probably at one time it wasn't. And man, hopefully it won't be again one day. And if that's kind of where your line of thinking is, then you are almost already a follower of Jesus. Because he has explained your experience in your life. You know what's interesting to me about Luke chapter 13? The atheist brings the topic of evil and suffering to us, assuming that if we truly confront evil and suffering, the natural conclusion has to be that God doesn't exist. People bring the topic of evil and suffering to Jesus, and he in that moment does not question the existence of God. He in the moment says there's only one natural response to the evil and suffering of this world. Repent. Because if there is a powerful, just, mighty, loving God, and there is evil and suffering that happens in this world, for Jesus, it has to only mean that the patience of God is being restrained at this moment. He's restraining through patience, holding back to give us more time to recognize who he is and what he's all about. But a day is going to come in which the clock is going to run out, and God the judge is going to appear on this earth, and one day evil and suffering will be no more, and they will be held into account, those who have done evil and suffering in that moment. And so if you look at a broken world as fallen people in a fallen world, you better look at this and realize the clock is ticking, and don't think, oh, I can take care of God later, I can consider this later. You better get right with God right now, because the greater the evil is, the more likely he is to return. And so Jesus said this should actually drive us to God, not from God. That evil and suffering are actually a sign that God exists, and not the greatest question of his existence. And so I wondered today, have you repented? What does it mean to repent? Well, in part, it means you turned from what you have believed and turned to what he says is true. And so maybe you bought into the idea of karma or agnosticism or atheism or even some of these underlying teachings of the prosperity gospel. And to repent means I'm going to turn from that and now to the way of Jesus. And one of the reasons I would encourage that, because judgment is also real. Listen to what the New City Catechism, how it teaches our kids of what's going to happen. What happens after death to those who are not united into Christ in faith? On the day of judgment, they will receive the fearful but just sentence of condemnation pronounced against them. They will be cast out from the favorable presence of God into hell to be justly and grievously punished forever. That's what Christianity teaches about the nature of humanity. And so the idea of coming judgment now reminds me of two things. One, it gives me great hope. You see, apart from Jesus, the perpetrators of evil in this world can escape any judgment by death. I'm going to live all that I want to live. I'm going to do all that I want to do. And when I've come to the end, I'm going to die. And then there's nothing after that. And so the idea that the hijackers on 9/11 died at the same moment as their victims behind them and below them, and they're all just going to experience the same future, whatever that is, that makes no sense to me. But Christianity says that the moment they breathe their last on this earth, they breathe their first in the presence of a holy and just God, and he will hold them accountable for what they have done. There are consequences to their actions. And so that gives me hope. It means if you're sitting in here right now and the great perpetrator of the evil in your life hasn't seemed to pay a consequence at all, or it hasn't been found, or we don't know what's going on, you can now trust God and say, okay, God, I know one day you will make all things right. But here's what the present of judgment also does for me. It gives me a warning. Because if judgment is coming for all, it's coming for me. And while maybe I can make an argument that I've never intentionally perpetrated evil, I have caused suffering. Sometimes because even in the midst of my own best intentions, sometimes without any good intentions. I failed the test. There is no way I can stand before a holy and just God. And yet the good news of Christianity is this: the currency of heaven is not karma, it's grace. And that God has sent his own son to defeat evil through suffering, has now made available to all of us the just sentence that is due to him, not to us. And to whomever is willing to accept it, you can now experience a freedom of forgiveness that guarantees an eternity now spent with God, all judgment taken away. And it is such a powerful transformation of life that literally once you experience this grace and get into heaven, if the person who perpetrated the evil upon you comes to the same experience, you will actually gladly welcome them into God's presence. That's the power of grace. And so what I want to do at this moment is I want to give you an opportunity to experience it. Maybe you never have before. Maybe you've never said, you know what, I'm going to take a stand with Jesus here. I don't understand it fully. None of us understand it fully, but I'm going to stand with Jesus. You can do that in this very moment, in your own words, in your own way. Same way I did as a little boy, May 5th, 1988, on my bed as a little boy. I just pray, God, I don't fully know you, but I follow you and I trust you and I give my life to you. And I've now tried to create my life around him. You can do that in this very moment. Normally at this moment, I would say every head bowed, every eye closed all across the room. And then I would just give you an opportunity to raise your hand in private to make a commitment to Christ. There's nothing wrong with that. That's great. It's not what I want to do today. You see, Jesus said, if you're not willing to acknowledge me before man, I'm not willing to acknowledge you before your Father. If you can't make a public declaration in this room with these people who love you and support you and are cheering on, you're going to have no chance of making that declaration at school tomorrow or work tomorrow in front of your unbelieving family. So here's what I want to do. If you've listened to this today and you're leaning more toward Christianity than all these other views, and if you've never committed your life to Christ, in just a moment, I'm going to ask you to stand. With every head up, every eye open, I'm going to ask you, maybe for the first time in your life, to take a stand for Jesus, and in so doing, your entire eternity will change. And so if you would like that today, I'm going to ask you to stand. 3, 2, 1, stand. Who wants to join heaven today? Who wants to join? Who wants to join? Look at this transformation that's taking place all across the room. All across the room. Your eternity has changed. Heaven is waiting for you. Grace is now given to you. Your sin has been forgotten, taken away from you. God now wants to work his grace at work within your life. He wants to show you how to build your life upon the foundation of Jesus Christ. You're never going to doubt this moment. You're never going to hold back. You're never going to regret this moment. If you begin to walk in faith, your eternity has changed. Just stay standing just for one moment. After this is done, right over here, we have the I raise my hand table because we didn't have time to make a sign that said, I stood up, bro. But as soon as this service ends, if you're willing, I would ask that you just go over there. We have a box that just begins to explain a book Pastor Ray wrote, a Bible that just begins to explain some of this. And we want to assist you in kind of working through what this actually means. I wonder if there's anybody else in this room that believes in Jesus Christ and wants to take a stand for him today. Whether you committed yourself long ago or right now, I wonder if the rest of us would stand in honor of our Savior. We don't have all the answers, and that should humble us to now trust Jesus and to say, even in not knowing, I'm going to follow you. Most gracious Heavenly Father, we thank you for the power of this day. For those who are watching online, for our friends who are at Folsom Prison, for those who are in the room, Father, we pray that today would truly change the eternity of those who are here so that we experience your grace, and by experiencing your grace, that we leave this place in a hope to alleviate the suffering of this world by unleashing compassion. It's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen.
Hey guys, Pastor Mark here, one of the senior pastors around here. So glad that you are actually part of Bayside Online. You really are part of our family. We have grown over the last couple of years online a ton, and we really do consider you as part of our church family. So what that means is make sure you subscribe and share this. It's great. But also get in a community group. Start watching the Bible study. Start being engaged. Even give. One of the ways that we can actually do online church and have this global community and even do the ministry of our campuses is by people partnering with us in the gospel, as Paul talks about in Philippians chapter 1. And that means by your resources, financially. There are people all over the world getting blessed through what we do at Bayside. And so obviously part of that is giving and using and stewarding that for the glory of God. So we're super thankful if you do that. We'd love you to start doing that, and just super thankful you're part of our church. So glad you're with us. Make sure that you let us know you're watching and part of this, because we want to get in touch with you and thank you and serve you any way we can. Anyway, thanks guys, and we will see you next week.